We're about to leave the station for the conductor's seat. So if you have any questions about DMing, GMing, I guess in this case too, tabletop, role playing, not board games, we won't answer those. Doesn't matter to me. But
yeah, nothing of a board game.
So interestingly, in the Sentinel Comics role playing game, not that it's anything like super revolutionary, but we refer to GMing as game moderating. That there's not a master. Everybody at the table, because everyone at the table is creating so much of the story. Like the ice cream tent that was created, and when you guys played, there was that whole absolute ice cream tent with all the. That is only existed in that one game that we ever played, that I've ever run of this.
That doesn't happen every time?
It doesn't happen every time. So.
That's what happens when you get a Bachman with you. That's
weird. I think it was Nick.
It was Nick! Nick, the Cast of Thrones Bachman. That's a
oh god.
That's a compliment.
Oh god.
I love those zany boys. They're very tall.
Delete.
I'm making notes. 804 to 822. 820. Let's say 3. Because I'm gonna go to the bathroom.
Okay.
To ?
All right then.
Well, now that he's gone,
he's getting Chinese food. He's going. I mean, it's very unprofessional, if you ask me.
I should bring that kitten back in here.
So you're going to be at PAX East, right?
I will be at PAX East. Yes.
Excellent.
Will you be at PAX East?
We will be at PAX East.
Excellent.
For sure. And I don't know how crazy you're going to be, but definitely would love to get some time.
Yeah. PAX East, I will be less crazy certainly than Gen Con, but that's no comparison. Probably slightly less crazy than PAX Unplugged. We have a bit of a smaller presence at PAX East. Still pretty notable, still doing a lot of things, but my schedule should be a bit more open than it was at PAX Unplugged. So this time maybe I won't skip out on when you guys are like, hey, come hang out at the bar, and like radio silence from Christopher. And I find the message like 7 hours later, I'm like, oh, right.
Yeah, I mean it's what can you do?
Conventions.
It's tough. But I wanna show you my prototype when I get a chance to get some feedback.
Yeah, definitely.
On my super secret game that the chat doesn't know about.
Me and the other 30 people that are watching this right now are sworn to secrecy.
What happened?
Nothing.
Oh, he's back. Oh no.
Did you guys cuss me?
Nope. We're just saying how great you look today.
Thank you. You can't tell, but it's a magenta sweater. It's a little pilled, but I like it. It's casual.
It's blue.
It's not blue. Is the thing.
Huh.
It's dark in my apartment.
Interesting.
I need a new apartment.
Interesting.
A little natural pilling is fine. It shows that it's a worn garment. It's not new off the rack. It's got character to it.
Exactly. It exudes a sense of comfort.
I feel bad that I didn't get the V-neck memo. You guys both are, some sort of I need a, oh geez, I'm sorry.
There you go. Well, okay. Michael, you don't have a V-neck.
Well,
per se, but yeah, we like to show a little skin on our stream. That's I don't want to say that to you. That's what we do.
I'm sorry,
the viewers.
Yeah, give them what they like. That's what I say. Let's make that 25.
A couple pieces of meat.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Conductor's Seat. I'm your main conductor, Tim Lanning. This is a show all about dungeon mastering, gungeon mastering, and my guest today is Michael DeMauro. How are you, Michael? Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me here, Tim. I really appreciate you asking me on again.
No worries. We also have a second guest as well, a rare threefer, Christopher Badell from Greater Than Games. Hello.
Greetings, and how are you?
I'm good. I stood up from my desk 2 or 3 times, and my microphone didn't short out and break my computer. So, good day.
That's a banner year.
The reason why I panicked earlier is I don't remember what I didn't remember what GM stood for. I now remember that it's Game Master.
Yeah,
or game moderator.
Or game moderator. And I was going to say that I had a whole thing, and then I forgot that word.
I'm gonna say Gungeon Master. It's got something going for it though.
Right.
I mean, most dungeons are, swords, spears, spike traps. But what about a dungeon that's just made of automatic rifles?
Yeah,
Just all guns.
It's a fantasy
Guns everywhere.
world. Yeah, there's that game, Enter the Gungeon. I've never played it, but I've heard.
Are there guns in that?
I don't know. Just don't know.
There's no way to know.
There's
How would you know?
There's no way to know.
Typically.
Any dang way. We're here to talk all about solving problems. Michael, go ahead. What were you about to say?
Oh, I was going to say, we invited Christopher on specifically because we've seen his miniatures collection. And with the expanse of his miniatures collection, he must be a very competent and skilled dungeon or game master / moderator.
How many miniatures do you have, and do you have enough?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the second one first because that's easy. No, obviously I
sure.
need more. Definitely. I do not know how many miniatures I have, but I do know that the number is in the hundreds. I don't think it's 4 digits. I don't think I've broken 1,000. Yeah, no,
I don't know.
Like, there's a lot
you
of.
might have to start counting.
Yeah,
this is the thing is I try to not count it, but I will say recently I had to move them all. Because the bookshelves that they lived on, Tim made the exact correct face reaction to that, one of horror, shock, dismay. Because the shelf that they lived on, those shelves all disappeared, and we got a new set of shelves that are off to the right that are really nice. But it means that I kind of they're all like the hard plastic miniatures, so
They broke under the weight. Is what
no. Okay, right, they might have. But I kind of swept them all into some shallow trays that I have saved off to the side so that I can later go through and come up with a new organizational system on the new shelves. And I was looking at that the other day. I'm like, that is at least a day, if not 2 days of my life. And I don't know that I have a day to there on that task right now.
Yeah. And how do you organize it? Is it by first name, first letter, or by type? That's
so. What I had them organized when you saw them, they were organized first by size, where the top of the shelf was the biggest ones. You got the colossal and the gargantuans, and then as you come down, you have huge, then large, and then the medium is like several shelves of mediums, and then all of the smalls and the tinies are at the bottom. And that way, it's like easily you're like, oh well, I'm fighting something. Frequently when you're in a GMing situation, you're like, okay, you guys are going to be fighting the purple worm. Shoot, I don't have a purple worm miniature. Of course I do. I have 3 purple worm miniatures. But anyway, let's say you didn't. You would want to grab something roughly of the same size because it matters for dimensional purposes on a grid map or whatever. Yeah. And so I keep it by size. And that way I can at least go to the right shelves. Then within those shelves, in terms of like the medium ones, I had everything organized. I had 1 shelf, I had 2 shelves of these could be PCs. Not to say that other things couldn't, but these are the most common, like dwarves and elves and humans and warriors and wizards, and like, okay, great, these are what these are. And then here's a couple of medium shelves of these are probably not PCs. Here's a bunch of skeletons and zombies. Here's a bunch of demons and things like that. And so like that's what everything was. And then beyond that, everything was organized by category, by like, okay, elementals and constructs and things like that.
So when you run a fantasy game, are you running D&D? If so, which edition? A Pathfinder, a Fate, your own personal system? What's the story here?
So I started out. The first game that I played seriously, the first system that I played seriously was D&D 3.0. I did play. I have since played like the previous before that, but when I was in college, D&D 3.0 is what I played. And I never played any before college. That was the first time that I did any role playing games, any tabletop role playing games. And so yeah, played 3rd edition. Quickly moved into 3.5 as that came around, and then later played 4th edition and Pathfinder. The most recent D&D. The most recent D&D that I've played is 5th edition, and I like 5th edition. It's a lot of fun. It's good. It's a good implementation of a lot of the previous things leading up to it. I also have done some Dungeon World. I've definitely done a lot of Fate stuff. I've done some 13th Age, and I mentioned Dungeon World, but also I've done Apocalypse World. But in terms of like a fantasy setting, you want more of a Dungeon World feel usually. that's pretty much the most of the fantasy setting type stuff I've done. And I've definitely done some more free form systemless RPG things from like, look, we're just going to sit and we're going to tell a story, and whenever I feel like I'm going to need you to roll something to prove to me what you're doing, then we'll talk about that. And with those systems, what I love doing when I'm running a game like that is, okay, tell me who your character is. Let's not worry about stats or anything like that. Just tell me who your character is. Tell me what you're good at. Tell me 2 things you're good at and 2 things you're bad at. And then we'll just go from there. And then somebody's like, oh, I pull out my sword. Do I have a sword? I'm like, do you have a sword? Do you have an axe? Do you have a spear? What do you pull out? Oh, I have a sword. Great, you have a sword. And now, and I just give people blank pieces of paper, and as they go, I'm like, as they say things, I have a sword. Great, now write that on your sheet. That's part of you now. Now you have a sword. But don't worry about like what can I and can I not do. And sometimes people are like, oh well, I'm gonna pull out my awesome magical sword. I'm like, okay, hold on. Why do you have an awesome magical sword? Where did that come from? Like, oh, I got it from my grandfather. I'm like, okay. Tell me more about that. There we go. And then I'll be like, okay, great. So we've crafted this tale. Your grandfather was this great guy, and he has this, like, he was the chosen one, but then ultimately he defeated everything and like won. And so now you need to justify to me that this sword still works. So for it. And then as well as that role turns up, maybe you do have a magical sword. Maybe you have a sword that was once magical, but let's be honest, it's seen better years. And just kind of go through that and let everybody be the architects for their own. I don't like that as much for campaign style play because at the end of the day, everybody's kind of like, well, I didn't at all make what I ended up wanting to make, but that was fun anyway.
I wanted to follow up that question with something that we've seen a few times with our previous questions, or something that happened to me recently in my Tomb of Annihilation game, wherein I gave everyone a quick, like, all right, we played our first session, which was, I didn't even explain how combat worked very well. Their characters weren't done. Some dude didn't have armor, things like that. Because I was like, all right, we could do this for forever. Let's just get in and play. And after that session, they got a better idea. They fixed their character sheets. And then we started the next session with, all right, everything that happened before is canon, but now I want you guys, you feel better in your character's shoes, or lack thereof. So let's do the first thing you do as you leave town. And some of them, one dude did a really good, like, magic weapon type thing. Like, they're level 1 characters, they have dog shit items, and he did a really good job to basically justify having a magical bow. They also made characters based on what they thought was cool, not what was smart, so all of their pluses are really bad. So I didn't feel
These are people who are not experienced with
they've never
role-playing games.
Yes. So I didn't feel bad about it. But, okay, so bringing that into the larger question, and I know you said you wouldn't technically do this for a campaign, but my question is, how do you reward people that are going after it without punishing those that aren't, and vice versa?
I am really sorry. You cut out as you started that sentence, so I started the second half of your ultimate question you were leading to there, and I hate to undercut the strength of it. The second half sounded really good.
Great. How do you punish, excuse me. Okay. How do you reward those that are really going after it from an RP standpoint? Right. And this is broadly speaking, not just magical items, but like the way you said that this person justified having a good ass magic item. How do you reward them without punishing, in large quotes, the other person? On top of that, how do you get those who are not going after it in the happy zone?
Okay, cool, great. We're on the same page now. That is one of the hardest things, I think, honestly, is that people that are natural or practiced role players who are going to do a good job explaining what they want and building a tale. Like, it's easy to reward those people, to be like, oh great, here's the thing, here's whatever you want, you've earned it, fantastic. And then other people at the table will frequently feel like, oh man, well, what do I get now? And either their job is either their choice then is to either follow suit and try to come up with something, or to sit back and feel like they're not getting enough stuff. I tend to try to play towards the strengths of the players, and that find out what a person is interested in, what sort of thing, what story they want to tell. And also I try to figure out what's important to players. If I'm doing a long-term campaign, I usually want to, before even the first session, kind of sit down with each player and be like, hey, what do you want to get out of this? Like, what is your goal here? What makes you happy? Is the thing that you're into is like, I want to kill the things with my big sword? Or the thing is like, no, I want to like meet people in this town and figure out like what makes them tick, or I want to solve a problem. I want to know that there's some sort of problem and I'm here to do something about it and make this place better, or I want to get gold, like whatever. And so figuring out like, okay, the guy that wants to get the cool story by telling the whole story and gets a magical bow out of it, that's probably like both the means and the end for him.
Yeah.
That he probably wants to spend the time telling that story, and getting the bow is his jam. Whereas somebody else is like, look, I just want to jump into it. And some people, I know that there's people, I actually have recently ran a game where I had two players that were very polar opposites of that, where one of them was like telling the story to get the things, and that was important to him. And the other player, she was like, I just want to go hit things really hard. It's important to me that I hit things hard and that I'm good in fights. And so I would give her things where like she would hit a thing and I would make up some rules about, okay, you have like stolen some power from this thing by hitting it so hard. And I would sit there and craft the story that maybe a more experienced role player might craft for herself. Like, because of the work that you're doing in this fight, because of the thing you want to do anyway, I'm going to give you that reward. So ultimately, everybody's getting the same reward, but people's input is tailored to what they want to do.
Interesting. And of course, that person would be like, that's awesome, thank you for doing it. And you're not like stepping on their RP toes, whereas the other person who's RPing it and is probably not smashing as well, but you know, it is doing something interesting, and everyone has that big ass smile on their face.
Right. Yeah. A big thing that's important to me is just that people love it when to like interrupt myself to answer my own question. I love it when somebody says when somebody says, "Oh, hey, can I give a suggestion for what the villain does here?" Or can I say, "Oh, like what's the bad guy does this, right?" I'm like, "You are correct. The bad guy absolutely does that."
Have you been looking at my notes?
Right. Like, I'll just sit here and roll the dice for the bad guys, and you tell the story. That's fantastic.
I don't need to be here.
Right. Yeah.
Michael, did you hear what he said? I think based on our argument that was behind the scenes where it got tense on, was that yesterday?
So, Chris, I have another question for you. What do you do when your players have just terrible ideas that are bad and no one would like them?
Okay.
How specifically do you punish those people and make them feel bad about themselves?
Okay, that's really fair. Give you a good answer.
Sorry, you froze on us for a second.
Okay, sorry. I want to dig more into this to get to get to the heart of this issue, to understand the questions that I'm answering here for you.
Yeah.
What is it that you, so similar to what I would ask a player, what is it that you as a GM want to get out of this?
Yeah, Michael, that's a great question. What do you want to get out of this?
As a GM, as a GM for a podcast, which is very different than just a regular person playing a game. We want to create something that's dramatic and interesting, and where everyone's having fun in our specific scenario.
Okay, so if your players are coming up with bad ideas, are they coming up with bad ideas in that they're like? I was.
Oh no! Like, let's there is some good meat here. I think obviously he's zagging on me, but we both agree that I didn't have a bad idea because we eventually somewhat agreed with me, but not really.
Well, we can bring up the actual thing in a little bit. Yeah. But I will say that there was an instance early on. I won't say who. It's a person who's no longer on the podcast.
Who's that?
Might have had like just a weird bad idea and got, and sometimes, like, I do feel like sometimes people will throw things out there, and sometimes, very rarely,
I have an example.
Want to be like, maybe that's not the best thing.
Yeah.
Maybe.
One of my new RPers was just having fun with it, and she's playing an air genasi, I believe. And she's like, I have 20 boobs. And I'm like, all right, I don't think you can have 20 boobs. I don't want to say no to many things you do, but I don't think you can have 20 boobs. That's a small thing, or like that's a small thing that's not ruining other people's fun. But yeah,
at that point, I think that my immediate response to that, like my immediate response when you said that was like, okay, why? Like, either why are you doing this because you want to be like a weirdo dork about it? Fine, sure, okay. Sure. Or are you doing this because you're like, oh, well, no, here's the deal. There's this like genetic mutation where some air genasis get extra boobs, but all of my ancestors had it, and it compounds all the way down. And as a result, I am like the final person, and they're all like vestigial, and so I just have like weird discolorations. You can't really tell, but it's a thing that is both like important to me, but I'm also somewhat ashamed of. Okay, great, okay. Like, why do you want to have 20 boobs? Do you want to have 20 boobs because you want to be a weirdo, or do you want to have 20 boobs because
What do you
it's a story
do?
thing.
And this isn't this person,
Sure.
but I think again to keep things vague while using real world. What do you do if that person's like, in this instance, if this ever gets back to them, that's not what she did. We had a fun time, and that's not what it is.
Sure. But if you're like, if you're asking these leading questions, you're like, come on, let's build a story. And they're like, look, I don't give a crap. I almost said a worse word. Are we swear?
Yeah, I've done a few swears. Yeah.
I try to. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, let's no more swears.
That's tricky. And that's where I would step back, step even further and say, okay, hold on. What do you want out of this game? Why are you playing this game? Like, if you don't care about your character and you don't care about the story and you're not wanting to move things forward, you just want to say weird things, why are you playing this game? And if the answer is you just want to like hang out with people and do weird things, fantastic. What if you have like a side character to this and you hang out and you do stuff and you're not like, if this were a book or a movie, you probably aren't one of the main characters if you don't want to be.
Yeah.
If you would be, then like, but I think the question is like, hey, let's all hang out, let's have a fun time together, but let's make sure that our motivations at least somewhat align. There's only that wide of a corridor that you can have disparity in there.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a actionable response. But.
Yeah. And there is like a much less intense version of that question. Someone asked me the other day that was like, this seems like someone at my table is not having fun, and I've basically floated out to them that they don't, if you don't like it, you don't have to come. Like, not rude way, like if you don't like it, you don't have to come. But like, hey, it's not a big deal if you're not having fun. So you're not having fun. But the DM felt like they weren't having fun, and I basically was like, hey man, if they want to come out and not have any idea of really what's going on in the story, as long as they're not hurting everyone else at the table, but occasionally wants to do something small, there's probably not a real problem here. You kind of have to turn that part of your brain off. Obviously, if it's a detriment to the rest of the table, that's another thing. But
that's the trick. Is if they're just doing their own thing, okay, one thing. But if they're hurting other people's fun, that's the problem.
Right. Let me throw out my example, which maybe seems fairly harmless, but like, I don't know. So you're on a pirate ship, right? And you're infiltrating this pirate ship. There's a bunch of sleeping pirates, and the GM asks you, so what do you do? How do you handle these pirates? And then you're in a fantasy setting, completely like
Michael won't let us have cannons.
Out of the book.
No gunpowder.
There's no gunpowder. And then one of the people's like, I produce sleeping pills out of nowhere and feed them to the pirate. And it's like, that doesn't even, I don't.
Yeah, if your character had like some sort of apothecary background, maybe we could,
Sure. And I mean, and that's the first thing I'd go. It's like, okay, tell me where you got those sleeping pills. Are they sleeping herbs? Maybe do you have some like sort of poultices that you made for this? And where did that come from? Let's. Have you played the Blades in the Dark?
No, but I've been meaning to forever.
Really cool.
So it has a really good system in it that like is fantastic for this. It has a flashback system where at any point in time, as you're playing along, you're like, a guard walks around the corner and levels a shotgun at you, and you're like, hold on, I want to do a quick flashback here. And the GM's like, sure, fine. And you do a flashback scene where you and you explain what it is. You're like, okay, well, this guard actually is a person that I met in advance of trying to pull off this heist, and I made a deal with him so that like he's helping me out here. And you play through that, and if you're successful at that, you have various degrees of that, and then you come back to your scene, and the GM's like, all right, the guard pulls the trigger, and the shotgun goes off, and you're like, great, I fall to the ground. Then the guard is like, okay, great, I got him, and you walk on, and you stand back up, and you're like, oh, good, I'm glad I paid that guy off to use blanks. And it's like, oh, cool, so you solved that problem. Not having it, you couldn't possibly have done that in advance.
Right.
There was no way that you could have actually, like Ocean 11, planned that in advance. But now in the moment, so this is the same sort of thing where you're like, okay, hold on, let's pause here. Where did that? Where did those sleeping pills come from? And even there's not like a mechanical system necessarily in D&D for this, but you'd be like,
sure,
let's put a pin in this scene and talk about where those came from, and make them roll through it. And you could like, great, so here in the past you tried to put together these sleeping pills, roll for it, see how well you do it, some sort of like craft poison or craft medicine skill. And if you only do mediocre, maybe you rolled poorly, but you thought you made some sleeping pills. Here you are in the scene. You have these sleeping pills that you made and that you believe in, and you give them to the pirates, and the pirates go, "We feel fine," because those didn't work. So you're not taking away what the person is trying to add to the game, but you're making them justify it, and for future purposes, hopefully making them think about like, oh, maybe I don't really have the skill to actually do that thing.
But Christopher, they were already sleeping.
Oh, they were already sleeping?
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. I don't understand. They were already sleeping?
More pills.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was.
I mean, at that point, it's like, okay, fine. You can feed the sleeping pirate sleeping pills. Everybody else, what do you want to do?
Right. No, it was like a effort to be there should be anachronistic and like I don't know. It was not great.
That's okay. Well, you're right. That's just weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I tried. Like,
Yeah.
You did great, and I was really reeling there for a minute, like shit. Maybe I did a bad job.
No,
and I was like, no.
There are tons of times that, oftentimes, your DM brain just kind of like twitches, like that wouldn't. Okay, let's get over the fact that wouldn't happen. I'm pretty sure your character wouldn't have done that last month, but this new month, your character's all about breaking lamps on people. That's your character now. Last month, you're all about collecting birds, but now you don't like birds. You're a lamp guy. That's fine. That's fine. That's today. I want you to have fun. But then you kind of, it's just such a give and take. And if everyone at the table wants to be fucking weird, I guess you're having fun.
Right.
But yeah.
Then maybe you're playing a different game, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's so many. There's like 2 questions that we get constantly, and it's basically could be boiled down to what if your players are playing a different game than the DM, and how do I make my players seem excited or get excited about it? And many of these smaller like questions that we've had just now even comes to those 2 things. It almost feels like the branching path of did you just find out, help, I'm playing a different game of Dungeons and Dragons or whatever than my players, send help, what do I do? And yeah, it's complicated, and I don't know the right answer all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you want to a lot of what we get is like, I want to craft this story or whatever. And the thing that we try to tell people to avoid is being the person who wants to craft a story and the players are just sort of along for the ride kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important. No, I mean, like the player agency and players driving the action. That's one of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. I love it when players are like, "Oh, the bad guy does this, right?" It's like, "Oh, yes, you're not just driving your own story; you're driving the whole thing."
Yeah.
I love that so much.
There's so much there's so much cool shit when you as a DM are like, "All right, I'm about to just fucking monologue for like 8 minutes because that's what we're about to do. Okay, that sucks. That's bad." But everyone's so excited that they're interrupting you. Like, okay, no, this happens, and then you find yourself as the DM not talking for like 25 minutes, and you're like,
"Oh, that's great.
I've wound up my machine." Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's perfect. I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great, we solved it. We solved D&D, guys.
Yeah. Have you ever had a situation when you were playing a different game than your players, or maybe if there was a character a player that was having less fun?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that like the first dozen plus games I ever ran, I came to from the point of view of like, I'm going to write this great, vast, deep story. I'm going to tell this like 20 novel story, and these players are going to live through it. It's going to be great. And by the end of the second session, I'm like, okay, no, I guess we're stealing pigs now.
We're pig thieves.
There was no pigs in my world at all, but they have both invented pigs and are now stealing them.
Yeah.
So
that was very explicit when we started. There are no pigs in this world, and you did this to hurt me. You're pig thieves just to attack me, your good friend Christopher.
Right. And so like it was I was saying very quickly. I did not very quickly. It took me a lot of time to stop doing ridiculous, over-the-top, epic world building at the beginning of every single one of my campaigns. Now I just still do it, but keep it really quiet.
Yeah.
And just have it background where like I write the story. This is I never learned my lesson. I just learned where the lens goes. What I do now, whenever I'm going to run a game where I'm like I'm going to run a campaign for maybe a couple of years, or hopefully we'll figure this out. I write this the world and create like deities and all the stuff for it, and then I write about the people that I would hope that my players and my PCs would become, but not expect my PCs to become those people, and instead have those people be in the world. Be like, okay, there's this guy and he's doing this thing, and there's this person who's doing this thing, and then and I don't have them show up for the first like 6+ sessions, and just be like, at the end of each session, part of my campaign prep is, okay, this is what my players did this thing. How does that affect each of my NPCs that are my behind the scene people? And so that way they start like reacting to the NPCs and being part of the world. And then later on, when these people show up, NPCs are like, oh, these guys feel like they've been part of this world for some time, and they feel very natural, and like they know who we are in some degree. So anyway, that's how I play a different game than my players for the sake of like giving me the joy I want in a game. But I definitely used to have a bad focus on that. Now I try to be very reactionary as a GM. I try to be like, okay, what is the game that you guys want? What is the thing that you're striving for? Let me just craft the world around you and give you the tools you need to pursue those goals. And if you're not pursuing goals on your own, let me like throw some hooks your way, some bait your way, but also throw some coals under your feet and give you some motivators.
Yeah, when we started our campaign, I originally imagined it being sort of like a gritty Game of Thrones kind of scenario.
That was on you. You met most of us before.
That was really naive of me, and and that idea quickly went away.
Yeah.
Do we want to ask some of these questions?
I would love to. Cat Smith asks, "Thank you so much for patronizing us." Cat Smith, is the only time you can say thanks for patronizing me. Because of Patreon. Thank you, Patreon, for existing. Cat Smith says, topic ideas. How do I create better depth in my game for my players? How do I create my world past building the city? I feel like this question, I guess, is how do I... so I'm putting words in Cat's mouth. I'm sorry, Cat. Something that we've talked about before is lore versus lore... vomiting, lore existing versus everything has a lived-in vibe to it. Is kind of what I'm getting here. Christopher, I'm going to read this again using her words. How do I create a better depth in my game for my players? How do I create my world past building the city?
So I like to start with rules, make up arbitrary rules. For a world, and be like, oh, in this world, people don't like this, or they do like this. And then immediately after that, think about, okay, so who are the people that don't follow those rules? Who are the people that break those rules? Who are the people that these rules don't apply to? And now I've automatically created like two different kinds of people, the rule followers and the rule not followers. And those people are both equally valid, because the rule that I started with was something like, well, we don't acknowledge the existence of pigs, to bring it back.
They're there, but we don't talk about them.
But we're like, no pigs. And then other people are like, excuse me, pigs rights, you know.
Excuse me, I had bacon for breakfast this morning.
It's like, oh, that was turkey bacon.
I love that.
They're just fooling themselves. So anyway, so yeah, I like to start with like silly things like that. Like, I'm going to create some weird rules and then push people in two different directions, and then specifically not tell players about those rules. Because if you're like, hey guys, in this world, there are two kinds of people, pig yesers and pig knowers. Like, okay, fine. I don't know why you're telling me this. I don't know why I care.
Whatever.
But if as you then exist in the world, you meet people, you're like, wait, I think there's like a whole bunch of people that don't believe in pigs. That's weird. Then you as a player get to feel cool that like you figured it out, that there's some pig liars, you know. Like, I don't know why I decided to fixate on this example, but
it's a good example. Yeah,
it's paying off.
Yeah,
it brings home the bacon.
Okay, actually, we don't do that.
Yeah. Okay.
That's one of our rules in our
world.
I'll go. Just kidding. Please. Go ham? Is that's one?
Yep,
right?
yep, sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. You can't say that here, though. Anyway.
So yeah, that's a good jumping off point. And the other thing I like to do
is... That's a great jumping off point.
Oh, thank you. The other thing I like to do is, like I mentioned earlier about being a reactionary GM, as players indicate that things are either important or not important to them, to really try to wrap that into the world and make sure that it's like, oh, like I had a player in a game that I ran last year that was like, oh, do you think, like, we just defeated the bad guy, do you think that there's some like legends of the heroes of old who would do this thing? And I'm like, well, there definitely are. And you guys are a lot like these heroes, and like eventually led them through this whole thing that like maybe they were these heroes reborn of old, and then they get to like this next big thing, and there's these people who died, who were like these heroes that were supposed to be the ones to survive everything, and they were the legends of the people reborn. And so anyway,
when that happens, so you've mentioned the PCs giving the DM ideas, and that's kind of ties into one of my favorite topics of DMing or GMing is lying. If your PCs give you either softballs, amazing home runs, or somewhere in between, do you readily be like, that's an awesome idea, I hadn't thought about that, it's now true? Or you'd be like, yes, this is all a part of it? Or, you know, of course, the more specific it is, it's a little harder to claim that you wrote down that as part of your world, that, you know, in this world there are no such thing as pigs, and now here we are.
Right.
But when a character says, is there a ancient line of heroes or something, like how do you spin it? Do you fluff them up? You can use that term without meaning giving someone a boner, right? That means,
nope.
Okay, but regardless, it works. I mean, do you praise them? How do you handle that?
So for me, I actually go so far in the fluffing direction that if somebody guesses a thing, but it says like, man, it'd be really cool, I would just love it if, I know this is not where we're going, but I'd love it if this is the thing that's going on in the city. And that's just like, I had verbatim written that down on my paper, and that was where we were going. I'm like, you know what? That is really cool. We're doing that. Because here's the deal. I do not GM to get cool points. Nobody is like, oh man,
disagree.
That Christopher, what a cool GM. He's so great. I love that he GMs. No, they want me to be the machine that runs the game. They want me to be the back engine of Skyrim or whatever. And so if anytime that player's like, hey, I created this cool thing and I want this to be part of the world, and I'm going to work with it, because every so often that player's like, hey, I created this cool thing, I want it to be part of the world. I'm like, that's nice. It probably is part of the world where we're not adventuring today or this year. Like, not everything fits. I'm not an infinite yes person. Sometimes I'm like, okay, what about a part of that, but not the whole thing. But anyway, if somebody's like excited about a thing, and it's something that I was going to do anyway, but they're really excited that they're the one that brought it to the table, sure, I've got nothing to lose by saying, yeah, they brought it to the table. Because I want the world to feel like it's a part of a part of like the group think is that what created this world.
And make them feel like they do have that, you know, agency and whatnot, and that it's a collaborative experience.
We're clearly all pulling the string. Right.
Obviously, we know all the stuff going on.
Right.
I know personally the type of player I am, and I try to fight against it as much as possible. But early Drunks and Dragons, I approached it I'm not trying to gatekeep, but the way that I don't currently like to play D&D is how I used to play D&D, which is trying to solve the DM's riddles and try to trick them, outsmart them, and things like that. And I don't like that anymore, but if that's what you like to do, that's what you like to do. So I think if you have one of those players and they figure out that whatever your bullshit MacGuffin is, you know, if you have a player that loves the back and forth story, absolutely do what Christopher says and be like, yes, I had never wrote down about the orb that drains the souls of the liars, pigs, so forth. I didn't think about that. And I've used before I love lying. I think I'm pro lying as a DM. The man, you ruined my thing, and now that particular type of players like, I did it. Think about when Harper solved the Army of Bahamut lamp issue. The extent to which Michael was upset made Tim Lanning happy. Think of Mika and the Demon Binder.
I knew you had done it accidentally, so that made me feel better.
It wasn't that accidental. Well, see, that was
dumb luck.
Yeah, it was dumb luck. But that was new Tim Lanning, who wanted to fight against making Michael sad, but wanted to make choices during rounds of combat that were not min-maxed most DPS, you know? Anyways, Mike Delaney asks, also, Kat, another thing that we've suggested many times, and I stick by it, over-prepare but throw it all out. Meaning, you know, don't go through, say, in this session, blah 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 blah. Michael and I, and thank you again, Michael, for guesting again, have
Sure.
said many times, strike that balance of just writing up all sorts of dumb shit, and if they don't get to it, then throw it out. But you have to throw it out. You have to be ready to throw it out. So if you design a dungeon for level 1, upgrade some DCs for level 13.
Right. Nothing should be precious to you. Nothing should be like mandatory to get in because, maybe the story doesn't go that way.
Yeah. And I think Christopher had some great ideas when he was talking about writing out, did you describe it as like rival adventurers or just rival people of note?
Yeah, I think it's just like notable people in the world that like the idea that there's these other people wandering around the world that aren't necessarily at the adventurers levels, but they give like they're parts of the world that are important.
Yeah.
And when you meet them, you're like, oh, here's the name of this person. They introduce themselves, and here's some like peculiar things about the way they look. This guy's carrying this like giant scroll case on his back, and this guy's wearing this notable green cap that has a hole in it. And you're like, oh, these people are players will key onto these things. Players are clever, and they'll key onto these things. They'll be like, oh, these people are being described much like I would describe myself, like much like a PC is being described. I all of a sudden care about this person, not because I've been told to care, but because I know enough about this person that they're not just like, oh, that guy is the blacksmith. Right. Okay, cool. So yeah.
I think that answers your question, or at least gets in the ballpark. And if that wasn't your question, I think we helped you in another way. That's what I believe. Mike Delaney asks, pacing for combat. I'm finding that hard to deadly encounter takes roughly an hour. How do you plan encounters, particularly while trying to keep each episode / game session to a reasonable length? I think that was pretty straightforward. How do you do fight if accidentally fight takes an hour and a half? My in-person game that I just started, they're like, wow, that battle with like 4 zombies took forever. I'm like, man, it happens.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. So I've not had to deal with the running a game in under an hour. Like the stuff that I do when I do scenarios, demos at conventions and things, I always plan on those being about 2 hours because an hour is so short. Mm-hmm. Like you get into hot water, and hot water is hard to get out of quickly. Yeah. Keeping something under an hour, I would say you've got to be willing to put pins into things. To be like, okay, hold on. Like, what if we get halfway through this fight, find a good pausing point, and then pick up the other side, or let a fight that's going. It depends on how much you want to do, how narrative you want to get versus how crunchy you want to get. Mm-hmm. Let a fight be solved in the story as opposed to in the mechanics. Be like, okay, hold on. You guys are fighting these 4 skeletons. You've gotten it down to just 2 skeletons left, and they're both injured, and you guys are going to do it. So be like, okay, with a few more swings of a sword and a blast of fire from the wizard, you have dispatched the remaining 2 skeletons. And they're like, hold on, we didn't roll for that. It's like, no, you didn't, but you definitely killed them. Let's move on.
That's a great point. That it seems so obvious, but it's never occurred to me. Michael and I have talked about, and I think it's been brought up before, what do you do when that monster that's supposed to be beefy has like 50 more hit points, but it's obvious the PCs have won the battle? I think what you just said makes so much sense. You guys have won. Let's go through it rapid fire. Either A, you tell them how badass they were, or B, let them, outside of initiative order, break sort of the... what's the word I'm looking for? The like combat, whatever bullshit of like. Right. There's a word, I can't find it. It's gone.
And I mean, I think at that point too, it's fine to also just be like, oh yeah, that hit did kill the dragon, even though it would take 3 more hits. But it's just like this is dragging on too long, and for the pacing of the game, let's keep moving.
Because because Michael and I, our answer was, all right, dragon has 38 more hit points. The party does an average of 10 hit points a round or something like that. Oh, look at that. It's dead. And I think that's a fine option as well. So is adding in more monsters to maybe give it a more stressful thing. But I really like that idea of switching from the combat framework and turning into RP framework. Like, hey man, time to be rock stars. You've won, so you tell me how to do it.
Right, and then mixing more role playing into the actual combat, right? Like the combat shouldn't be just boring, you rolling and doing as much damage as you can do, kind of thing, right? Like if it feels too long, then maybe it's how the combat is working as opposed to just the actual length of the combat.
Yep, and it also comes down to that age-old question of what type of game are you running? What type of game are your players playing? If your players like that, grid-based, figuring out, like solving solving your battle puzzle, then man, 4-hour battles, that's fine because they're having fun. But if people get bored, that there needs to be a solution to that. Any other ideas on pacing? You mentioned episode. I don't know if you're doing your own podcast. Podcast D&D is different than table D&D, and
right.
There's things you can learn from each side, things that we can do better, things that we have gotten better at, for sure. But I guess there's some things you can definitely learn from podcasts at your home, but you probably don't want to accidentally over rely on that, I guess.
Yeah, that's being willing to create artificial like pause points between sessions, I think helps, so that you don't feel like, oh, we have to wrap up in an hour. It's like, no, we have to be willing to pause within an hour.
Yep.
But I think that speaks to pacing. And honestly, I love ending sessions / beginning sessions on cliffhangers of some sort, where it's like, all right, so you just defeated this actually ties into a thing that I was thinking of when you were talking about. Oh shoot, I made this really cool encounter with this giant monster, and the PCs for whatever reason are paced it in 2 rounds. And so it's down to 13 hit points. You're like, oh man, this thing was supposed to be bigger. I definitely in a campaign once just horribly cheated, where they had my thing down in 1 round, like 1 round of combat. Everybody did unleash their big stuff, and this thing is on its last legs. So like, okay, it gets to its turn. On its turn, it rears back and roars and explodes, and its carcass just flies everywhere, and it's dead. And out of that mess crawls an even weirder, grosser elder thing monster that was some parasite that lived inside it that had the exact stats of the original monster. And they just said, okay, I'm starting over again, but I'm increasing its like AC by 2. Yeah. I'm giving it an extra 100 hit points. Fine. I was living inside the monster the whole time.
I'm stealing that idea, but instead of being like, oh god, weird thing, I'm going the like Nier Automata route or some other anime or JRPG route, and outside of the weird dragon creature comes a sexy dude or lady, long hair, smooth skin, no nipples or belly button. Same idea, but now we get to roll.
Yeah, right.
A little different.
Weird elder thing. Yeah, that makes sense.
Same idea. Fem DM from the chat asks, I don't know if you guys are watching the chat. We are. But do you prefer writing long stories all at once or writing a bit at a time?
Well, yeah. I think I like to come up with kind of big story beats that, like things I want us to get to. I mean, but again, like when you make a plan, you don't write down every part of the plan. You just make bullets and keep it loose. And, if it goes that way, it goes that way. But yeah, I wouldn't think of them as stories necessarily.
Yeah, I actually responded in the chat about that and said I just like making a list, like an outline of where things can go, and you can always have a branching outline. But then I don't bother writing the connective tissue until we get closer to it, because frequently I'll be like, okay, this is happening 4 points down my outline, and as we're approaching there, nope, we veer off into some sort of nonsense territory, nowhere near where we were going. So at that point, I need to be willing to chuck half my outline. Yep. And if I had written a bunch of the longer connective tissue, I'd be grumpy. I'd be like, oh no, what do I do with this? And spin it off into another game.
It's like, you guys aren't getting to the fireworks factory. Come on. It's like, no man, pigs got to go. Right. We're all about that. Yeah.
I also like the idea of having the list. I mentioned this in past episodes where I keep a secrets list, and these are the current secrets that are happening in the realm or whatever. and like hopefully, you know, each episode or play session, maybe they'll discover one or two of them in various ways, and that's just like kind of a fun way to have a bunch of things for people to like uncover as they're going.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Speedy Olrak asks, what do you do when players are not interacting with the game? Again, two questions. This one and the other one. Really. Yeah.
And it's usually you got to figure out how to engage that player. What is that player? What excites that player? And that's either you know, either you figure that out, or maybe they're not the right person to be playing games with.
If they're not having a good time and they're not able to communicate to you what it is they want, if you have that like, okay, why are you doing this, and you can't get a good answer out of them, but they want to keep playing, it's probably that they want to be hanging out with the other people at the table, that they're there for it to be a social activity.
Yep.
That's fine, and that's actually a fine motivator, because you're like, okay, great, my goal is to make sure that the people that this person likes are having a good time. Because if the person that this person wants to hang out with are having a nice time, then they should, like, that should be motivating to them. That should be encouraging to them. They'd be like, okay, cool. My friends are having a good time. I can get some catharsis out of that.
Yeah, yeah. There's on Reddit and previous questions, it's usually the girlfriend/boyfriend of one person who's not quite dragged along, not dragged along, but wants to be there, or it's a person that, as you guys said, likes the group, but maybe isn't interacting. And again, luckily, someone asked me this question like 3 weeks ago. If they're having fun, man, and not getting in the way of everything, you're totally fine. Now, if none of your characters are, if all your players are just kind of like whatever. I mean, it can be hard if you're a DM or a player and person B is having a lot of fun times, basically just wants to be here to hang out for a Tuesday, and is on their phone. There's like non-verbal cues. It's very easy to get grumpy into the grump zone. I have no real advice on that, because I think it's a natural human reaction to kind of feel like, okay, what are you doing here? Other than, don't take everything so seriously. If they're having fun, if everyone at the table's not being grunched up, if they are being a roadblock to the fun times, you might have to have an adult conversation. And that adult conversation might literally be, hey, what are you trying to get out of this? If it is just to hang out, you can be, as we mentioned before, you can be there, but you can't ask if there's, teleporters, or you can't do any wacky zany capers that kind of feel out of place with what other characters can do. But you can be their like squire that is around and giving good ideas and bumbling. You can be bumbling if you want, that's fun. But
I've started GMing or DMing or whatever for my 14-year-old son and my 9-year-old daughter. And it is actually amazing training for how to keep your players focused, because just the slightest little lull and they're like up and like running around the room. So it's like, really, I would suggest maybe getting some small children and trying to run a game for them, and then you'll get really strong and you'll be able to keep people focused.
It's like a stand-up comedian that has to go do 109 shitty open mics to get one good joke.
So Michael, where do you recommend that I go and obtain these children? Should I just take them from the local playgrounds?
They're all over. They're just running around.
All right.
Yeah, I know that high schools don't like D&D because of the Satan stuff, so you should just go to the high school.
I think that was your high school.
Oh, what's up? Most high schools are Christian, because that's what I went to.
Excuse me, this is One Nation Under God, right?
Yeah. Let me go find a penny real quick.
Okay, yeah.
Please don't go into schools unattended. Nucurio, let's do this one quickly. We have maybe time for this one and one more. Nucurio asks, how do you come up with ideas for your campaigns from each session to endgame? This is one we've gotten before, this basic idea. How the heck do you make stuff up?
Where's your inspiration come from?
So yeah, like this is the thing that I mentioned about when I started GMing. I would write epic tales. I would write these long, elaborate stories. I'm like, come play in the world of the story that you're gonna play through, and then that's like bad because they're just gone, and the players are like, nah, I'm not interested at all in your story. So now I try to focus on making settings and making things that are going on in the world. The thing that you said, Michael, about secrets is a great way to do it, about having like, here's a bunch of stuff that's going on in the background. The question about how to get inspiration for those, absorb media. Like, you can totally just make up your own stuff, and that's great. And if you have an idea for a thing, awesome, dig into that. But if you don't have an idea for a thing, there's absolutely nothing wrong with turning on some dumb Netflix movie and stealing the main plot from that, turning it into elves and orcs or something, I guess, instead, and putting it as, instead of the main plot for your game, make it a side plot in your game.
Yeah.
So like, try to have an idea for, try to come up with an idea for what is going on in your world, and it might take you a while to get there, but building up some of the side unimportant plots with other people's plots, fantastic, because like, there are no news stories. Every story has been told a million times. I don't necessarily fully believe that, but that is a thing that gets said a lot about fiction and storytelling. So fine, lean into it. Grab somebody else's story and rework it to make it the background for your story.
Yeah, it's like, the dwarves stole the lemon tree from the elves? Oh no,
Right.
What do we do? Yeah,
Right.
what's that phrase that we say, like, good DMs borrow, great DMs steal? I forget initially who that was attributed to or whatever, but or was it, that sounds like a Yogi Berra quote about like writing or something like that.
Tim, what's the lemon tree? What are you talking about?
That's from
What
the
story is
hit
that?
television show Simpsons.
Is that a thing? I don't.
Yeah, Shelbyville stole their lemon tree. It was funny.
Okay.
There's a bit where they go, hey, there's that yellow-shaped rock. And then the audience are like, that's a lemon, dummy. And then the other character goes, there's a lemon behind that rock. And it was just a lemon-shaped yellow rock. It's a funny episode.
Man.
You should watch it.
Okay.
So interestingly, Tim, the quote, good artists copy, great artists steal, is an old one that's been attributed to Steve Jobs, Pablo Picasso, T.S. Eliot, all sorts of people, and it's actually very difficult. There's not a definitive answer on where exactly it comes from. So
I invented that
I
quote.
heard Picasso. That was I heard.
I did it.
The closest is that T.S. Eliot wrote that the immature poet imitates and the mature poet plagiarizes, but like, it probably did not start with him.
Yeah. I feel like I heard Chris Perkins basically say the exact same thing, so it's
Right. He borrowed that.
Yeah. And I always find the question of how do I get inspiration interesting, because there's no right answer other than consume, because different like it sounds like you, Christopher, are lean into the I'm love writing, and I've accepted that maybe my players won't take everything, but I have checked off that heart box for myself. I have made myself happy in this game, even if they don't follow it. I had fun with that versus the people like, yo dog, you're friggin' playing the Lord of the Ring now. I don't know, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you could literally pull inspiration from anything. You could go to the museum and look at an old like Renaissance painting and be like, "What's happening in this painting?" Now I've figured out that's my inspiration, because that's what inspires me, and I'm gonna write a campaign.
You go to a town where all the animals are all fucked up looking, and the horses' necks are really big.
Michael, you said a thing that absolutely sparked the other way that I do a lot of my writing, not just in when I'm doing an RPGs, but like any sort of writing, is almost universally starts with how did this go wrong? Is my favorite question, and it's a thing that I do in my daily life when I'm walking around at a convention, or if I go to a museum or something like that. I walk and I'm standing in an area with people, and there's things going on. I'm like, okay, so what are like 3 interesting ways that things could go really wrong here? Because that's great stuff to start with, because that's what RPGs are. Yeah. There's something going on in this world, and something's going wrong, and you should probably do something about it. And so like having thinking about, like, you're looking at a museum and you're looking at a painting, you're like, okay, look at the scene of this painting, how could something go wrong in that scene? Also, let me zoom out a little bit, how could something go wrong in this museum that I'm in right now? Like, that sort of thinking is where, like, conflict is where stories come from. Yeah. And so what are the conflicts in your world?
Yeah, that's a great one, and that's one of the few I guess like almost like workable day-to-day suggestions we've given. Like here's like a training exercise you can do while you're out and about. Think of how the bank could be foiled or any goofy stuff like that. It sounds like just let your imagination go wild and feel free to steal. Last question quickly. Bearded Offender asks, from a PC perspective, how do you help out a struggling DM? One having trouble moving the story along, or with an obvious lack of planning? This one is a very, very loaded question. And we can take it as face value that all these things are true. And I think one way to take it is that maybe we have a backseat DM alert.
Well, I will say, like, we've probably all been in a situation in a game in which the GM is not necessarily as prepared for some reason. It's happened to me a lot where I'll be like, okay, I'm supposed to GM this game tonight. I'm not quite there. I'll just run some stuff. And one of the greatest boons to me in that situation is a PC that does something I did not expect. Not necessarily I brought out these like sleeping pills to give to a bunch of sleeping pirates, but doing something that's a little bit like, you know, so they're fighting against some things, and the PC goes, "Oh, hey, bad guys, hold on, you're pirates or something? Can we join you? Is there a process for that? Okay, now the story's easy for me. Yeah. Now I can just like, all right, let me give you some information here, like making me react, I guess." So that's the same thing. I think a good GM is reactive. So if you want to help a struggling GM, give them something to react to.
I agree. I agree.
Absolutely.
I think oftentimes players feel like they can't do anything. They feel like the DM, and that's not even. There's no judgment in this statement towards a DM. I'm not saying like bad DMs make bad PCs. I'm saying like it feels sometimes that you're not able to drive the story along. And Michael's very good at that with us. He's like, yeah, you know, you can pursue whatever. Obviously, he has his goals that session in case we sit there like wooden faces. But it's such a gift. If you're respectful about it, it's such a gift to have one of your players get like super horny for like the weird, not even side quest, the like bullshit in the side of the tavern where you're like, you didn't plan for this, you could have never planned for it, so you're now in an area of positivity, hope, and friendship where you get to make up what's the deal with the janitor that lost his favorite broom. Here's a new quest, and everyone kind of probably like. There's a lot of unsaid rules when you DM when you play a game like this. It's storytelling. You kind of have to expect that the DM hasn't prepared everything you're gonna do, things like that. So yeah, go on your fun broom adventure and things like that. You need to be careful when you do it, I think. Make sure you're not necessarily, especially it can be hard if you're used to DMing yourself and you maybe smell some weakness in the DM water and you're like, aha, this is a better thing. Be careful. But I feel like DMs feed off enthusiasm more than anything. So if you're enthusiastic about what they're doing and are able to sort of synergize the whole thing, you have you know our blessing. It sounds like, as long as you're nice. Gotta say that 4 more times. Be nice. Make sure you're not dogging on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are some great questions.
I agree.
Good, even greater answers.
I think so too. Well, thank you so much, Christopher, for coming on. I hope maybe you have learned something yourself, or maybe learn to love yourself more, or maybe realize, yeah, I'm a badass. I hope that's what you're coming out from this.
I definitely got a lot out of this. I enjoyed it a lot too.
Perfect.
Michael, I've grown as a person.
Michael, I hope you self-actualized and finally learn to forgive yourself, because that's why we're all here, really. Thank you for guesting.
I'm still working on it every day.
We'll see what we can do. And thank you, everyone out there in Patreon land, for making this happen. It's because of you that we're able to do this. Please continue to give us your questions. We'll create a new March Conductors Seat thread where you put your questions, and then closer to the time of recording, we will put up another one saying, hey, when we are recording. Oh no, yeah, what's that, Michael? You okay? You just fiddling?
Everything's fine.
Yep. Okay, whatever. Yeah, we hit basically just at an hour right here, and so Michael's in the fiddle zone. I've been in the fiddle zone the entire time. That's That's where I'm coming from. But again, thank you.
You want to go another hour?
Yeah, I have to pee and eat some Chinese food. Let's do it. Not in that order. So yeah, thank you so much for making this possible, and we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks. Have a good one.
Thank you, everybody. Awesome.
We made 2 contents.
Awesome. We did. Thank you,
Double
Christopher. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. I'm glad I got to randomly meet up with you folks. Like,
Yeah.
that was fun. And I'll see you pretty soon in PAX East. That's
I'm excited. I've kind of completely forgot about that, and then remembered it. I was like, oh god.
We have a very nice Airbnb around, which I think didn't it was like it's okay to have parties. This is the only Airbnb.
It's the only Airbnb that was like, if you want to or if you're having a party, let me know. And I was like, usually everyone's like, if you have a party, we'll delete your account, and we still have them anyways. But yeah, this one I'm excited about.
Mm-hmm. It's close to the convention center, so
yeah.
Oh, that's always nice. The PAX is always a tough one for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing around there.
It's a bad part of Boston. As a Bostonian, I apologize.
Yeah, no, like if you're like, oh, I'll just walk from the convention center to a place to eat or something. Like, okay.
No.
Yeah, good luck.
All right, well, thank you, Twitch. We still have a good time making these free. The archive will be deleted in a couple days, and then if you missed it, the rest of it will be on our Patreon in a future Thursday. So
right,
that reminds me of the delete
this specific one. I think we're gonna just put out there as a first one's free kind of situation.
Give you just a taste, like the drug dealers do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you again.
Great way to run your game.
Mm-hmm. What do sex workers do? What do drug dealers do? That's kind of
you gotta ask yourself these questions.